It was really nice because you had Clara, who was very magical realism-ish. And she was talking about supernatural stuff. She was talking about, like events that involve magic in a way, and she was talking about them as if they were totally normal, which is what magical realism is, like this Latin American movement, right, from the 20th century. And then you had Edu, who was a lot more skeptical about it. He was like, okay, but that doesn't really sound possible to me, who feels more like Spanish literature from that same century, because after the Civil War and stuff, we were really focused on realism, on reflecting how things were. So it was a really interesting contrast in its sense, because we had the magical realism girl and the realism, this realism boy coming together. It was a really interesting contrast.
Hola amigos, I'm Danny Jane Norwell and this is the penultimo Snapshots of Spain book chat. That's right, today you may hear a bit more Spanish than you are used to in these book chats because we are going to be discussing Edu, the 10th novella in this collection, which is also the only story written entirely in Spanish. Later today, I'm going to be joined by special guest Gee of Gee.reads.books, who is a Spaniard and therefore a native Spanish speaker, who I know will be able to provide a special insights into this story, but not to fear, Gee is incredibly fluent in English as well, so we will be conducting this conversation primarily in English. That being said, obviously the reading will be in Spanish, and if anything comes up in Spanish, we'll be sure to provide you some context in English as well. And of course, if you are a Spanish speaker and would like to ask us anything in Spanish, that is welcome. Just go ahead and drop us a comment in the chat here and we'll be sure to respond to you. Just reiterating that in Spanish, por si acaso que hablas español y deseas preguntarnos algo en español, pues claro que sí. Déjanos tu pregunta y te lo respondemos en español sin problemas. So thank you so much to everybody joining today or watching in on the replay. I will start out as always sharing with you a reading from this story, but of course the reading will be in Spanish. So just to give you a little bit of context in English first, Edu is a story of impossible love. And so this story actually takes place during the pandemic and specifically during the 2020 lockdown in Spain, which is very important to the plot of this story. In this particular excerpt, it has been 2 months that Edu has been basically in isolation because he's been alone in his small flat all by himself and has not really left for anything during that time. So in this moment that I'm going to read to you about, he steps out onto his balcony for the first time and meets the girl of his dreams. So let me take a quick swig of water and then I will share this excerpt with you. Here we go. Según las normas del confinamiento, la gente no podía salir de su casa, si no fuera para ir a los sitios necesarios, como el supermercado o la farmacia. Sin embargo, había muchas personas sentadas en sus balcones, y las que no tenían balcones incluso parecían haberse acostumbrado a asomarse por las ventanas. Habían abuelitos, niños y jóvenes. Todos estaban allí, disfrutando de pasar el tiempo juntos, pese a estar separados. Por primera vez en muchas semanas, Edu sonrió para sí mismo. Casi se le había olvidado de la sensación de sentirse acompañado. Edu se quedó ensimismado en las charlas de las abuelas y el barullo de los niños gritándose los unos a los otros desde sus balcones. Por ello, no percibió la mirada de una chica joven que estaba en un balcón del edificio amarillo de la calle perpendicular. La guapa desconocida estaba tendiendo la ropa. Al parecer, ella pensaba que Edu la miraba, porque ella utilizó la prenda que tenía en su mano derecha para saludarle. Sin haber notado antes su existencia, la mirada de Edu se les dirigió a las bragas negras que la chica estaba agitando hacia él. Arqueó una ceja con insinuación y se rió cuando la chica se dio cuenta de la prenda que había usado para llamar su atención. Las mejillas de la chica se pusieron más rojas que un tomate y se escondió las bragas detrás de la espalda. «Dios mío», exclamó ella. Edu no podía dejar de reírse, pero logró recuperar el aliento tras la gran carcajada para decir tranquila, tranquila. Sin embargo, la chica estaba avergonzada a más no poder y empezó a recoger todas sus pertenencias para refugiarse en su casa, aunque todavía no había terminado de tender nada, todo. No, no te vayas, Edu le rogó. En serio, llevo mucho tiempo sin reírme de veras. Solo eso. No te vayas por mí, por favor. La chica se detuvo. Intentó sonreír, pero todavía estaba ruborizada. También llevaba mucho tiempo sin interactuar de verdad con los demás y estaba desconcertada por las acciones tan ridículas que había llevado a cabo. Sin embargo, su deseo de comunicar era mayor que la vergüenza y se quedó. And that is the excerpt from Edu. So for those of you who perhaps were not able to follow along in Spanish, I will say this is the moment when Edu meets Clara for the first time. He's out on his balcony and just getting lost in that sensation of not feeling alone for once, now that he sees all of his neighbors out there interacting with each other. And it's in that moment that Clara actually thinks he is looking at her, and so she waves to him. But because she's in the middle of hanging her laundry out to dry, she actually waves with a pair of underwear, which of course leads to this embarrassing kind of awkward moment between the two of them when Edu gives her just kind of this insinuatory look, and they have this laugh, and it's just one of those moments that I think is really sweet, and they have not interacted with other people in a long time, and so it's a little bit awkward. But at the end there, you see they're going to stay and have a conversation between their balconies. So that is the beginning of the potential relationship between Edu and Clara. So with that, I will invite on our special guest for today, Gee, and we can get a little bit more into this story. And it's... Hi there!
Yeah. Hello. Hey, how are you?
I'm good! Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited.
I'm happy to be here. That was an excellent reading too.
Thank you. It's been a long time since I've read aloud in Spanish. I felt like I was back in Spanish class.
Okay, I would feel the same way if I had to read out loud in English, so.
Oh. Well, I should say that G was a huge help for me during the process of writing Snapshots of Spain in general. She was one of my beta readers. So you really got an opportunity to see a lot of these stories from the earlier stages, but not Edu. I actually had written this differently.
Yes.
So I guess I am curious to hear now, because I haven't had an opportunity in the past. What about Edu resonated with you? Was there anything you found special about this story?
I mean, I think everyone can relate to an extent to the whole lockdown situation, like not getting out of your house for 3 whole months, not seeing any other human being, other than like your family or whoever you live with, being desperate for literally anything, any sort of interaction. So it was kind of like returning to that feeling, which was interesting. And I also really like the whole parts about meeting someone in the middle of a pandemic. Like I could definitely relate to that. I don't know, it just brought a lot of memories.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that time in our lives, because I know you were also in Spain, so you experienced the lockdown similarly, perhaps, to Edu. What was that time like for you?
It was crazy. Like, I do have a dog, so after a week or two, the government allowed us to go out with our dogs to walk them, because obviously you can't just keep a dog inside the house for 3 months, right? Um, but that was the only time of the day I could go outside of my house. Like, I would just spend every other hour inside the house, unable to do much more than check the news, read some books. Technically, I did have uni, so I was enrolled in uni my second year, and I could focus on that instead of, like on everything that was going on at the moment. So that was a welcome distraction, but it was still really isolating. Just like yes for Edu, it's just like I want to get out of here. I want to see someone, anyone, literally anyone. I will befriend the bus driver if I had to.
Exactly. I think we were all in just like this strange antisocial moment where we kind of forgot how to interact with people, but we were also so desperate for it, as you said.
It was like because after some point, the way it worked here in Madrid was it could like certain groups of people could go out at certain times of the day. So 20 to 40-year-olds could go outside 7 p.m. Then elderly people could go outside from 6 to 7, something like that. Um, and it was so weird because I would see people in the street and I would think, okay, these are other people. I have no clue how to interact with them. Like, do I say hi when I cross paths with them? Because I kind of want to say hi, but I don't know them. But I kind of want to say hi. And do I wave? Do I just actually say hi? Do I make eye contact? Do I not? It was so confusing for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time going out during that period, like you said, when we had these time, like little short periods of time for each age group. And I just remember noticing, for me, it was so shocking to see the Spanish people who were speaking to each other standing so far apart. Because I think, yeah, it might not be that unusual in the US or the UK, but Spanish people tend to be very close and to speak and touch each other as they speak and give two kisses. And so it was just very, very uncomfortable in so many different ways.
Or or when you would meet with family or friends and you would still keep that meter and a half social distance thing. It was so weird. Or like being told, yeah, you can come in, and instead of the person like actually letting you in, they would like go back a few steps to avoid being anyone near you. It was interesting. It felt really weird before.
For sure. Excuse me. So I did want to use this unusual time in our lives as the backdrop of Edu and Clara's story because it does make the chances of them actually coming into contact again so difficult and so impossible, perhaps. But I know that you also happened to find love during the pandemic, which is like, what? How did you manage that? So would you like to share a little bit about that? Because I think it's such a cool connection.
It really was, especially because, by that point, I was like, okay, if I haven't met a person during normal times, there's no way I'm going to meet anyone during a pandemic. Like, that's just not going to happen. Um, but because I, like, started writing and posting a story online, chapter by chapter, for some reason that story got very popular, and a lot of people started putting it and leaving comments and stuff. And one of those, oops, sorry about that. And one of those people, well, Charlie was like, "Oh, I really like this story. I want to do some banner, like some artwork for the story. Maybe we can talk about that on Instagram or just wherever, like somewhere else. Just that particular platform. Oh, that's my dog. That particular platform, AO3 does not allow direct messaging and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll just give him my Instagram because that one doesn't have any pictures of me or any details about my private life. It's just books and like bookish stuff. And that was how. Just through comments on a random story on the internet.
That's amazing. Yeah, and like you said, do you think that that would have come up during a different point in time if you were going about life as normal?
It might have, but it is true that I devoted a lot more time to writing and being online and stuff because you couldn't really see other people a lot. Like some of
Mm.
my friends were immunodepressed, so I couldn't go see them with the COVID thing. Some others were taking care of like people in their family who were badly affected by COVID, so I couldn't see them very often. So yeah, I think that remaining like that isolation we still had going on in 2021 definitely helped make this
Yeah.
happen.
It's crazy how it can make it so much more difficult to meet someone, and yet it was also, ironically, part of the reason why you were more available and more open.
It really, really was. Like, just really? Are you kidding me now?
I love it. And yeah, I think your story is almost even more impossible than Edu and Clara because you weren't even in the same country.
We're in the same continent.
Yeah, you've made it work. So you guys are my favorite. I love getting to hear about the two of you.
I love talking about Iceland. Okay, I've got you covered.
Um, well, I know a few more people have joined from the beginning, so I will just reiterate that we're chatting about the short story Edu, which is a Spanish language story that takes place during the pandemic. So if you have any questions about life in Spain at that time or anything about this story, feel free to drop your comments or questions for us.
Hmm.
But I certainly have a few more questions for you if you don't mind. Oh, I do often like to share excerpts from reviews that I've gotten from readers, and G wrote me a beautiful review. So I wanted to share this part and then ask you a little bit more about it.
Yes, go ahead.
So you said, excuse me, as a Spaniard, I couldn't have felt more head over heels about this love letter to my homeland. Spain is a very Spain is very diverse in its traditions, depending on where you go, and although Danny chose very different locations that are sometimes polar opposites in more than one thing, she did an absolutely phenomenal job.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
I
That meant so much to me to hear from a Spaniard because it's so hard to write about
yeah.
somebody else's country and not know how it will be received. So would you share a little bit more about that?
It has to be hot. For example, with history, I met Charlie thanks to. I was writing about Italy, and although Italy is kind of a sibling country to us, because we're very similar in terms of how Spaniards and Italians are, our shared history, like the Spanish Empire actually controlled a part of Italy for a while that during the Middle Ages. Mm, it's still not my country. Like, I'm still not that. So I was really, really quick to step on someone's toes by saying the wrong thing or using an expression the wrong way. I remember that I did have an Italian beta, Ellen, and I was constantly asking her, like, would Italian people do this? Or would they act this way? Or would they act a different way? Like, what would they do in this situation? It was really intimidating thinking, okay, if an Italian reads this story, I might or might not get told off about it.
Ah, yeah. And I mean, I will say that just like you had Ellie, I had you to ask my questions too, because it was very important to me that I did a good job. And I've lived in Spain for many years, so I felt more or less equipped to do this, but it's always different to have an outside perspective.
Brilliant from the start in your time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it was amazing to have you on board on the beta reading team. And I think there were definitely the little things that I did want to include, perhaps not in this story, but I'm thinking like in a part, there's a character who's talking about like the conflict in Catalonia
Mm,
and how they want independence and like how I wanted to include that. You definitely talked me through like, okay, maybe this way makes sense, but it might not be acceptable in this way. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic, so it was hard to like be able to kind of find a way to represent the two main like opinions about it without leaning towards one or the other. It was like I don't know, I think it would be hard even for Spaniards living in that. So
Mm.
like such a complex issue we're having at the moment. It's been going on for maybe 10 years now. It was a hot one. I think you really did a good job of, like talking about it, presenting it without taking a clear stance, without saying, I do stand with this or I do side with these people instead.
And I most certainly didn't want to take a stance on it, but just kind of acknowledge that this is a big conversation that happens in Spain. Mm, all right. Yeah, was there anything else about that topic that I don't know if there was anything else on your mind?
I know. I would like to ask you, how did you like? How was the experience of writing in a different language? Because I know that Spanish is really hard for a lot of people who have it as a second language. So writing a whole story in Spanish must have been quite a challenge.
Yeah, it was. It was definitely a challenge for me, and I took it on in a very different way than I did with my English language stories, which is part of the reason it didn't go through my normal beta reading process. I spent two two classes per week working with a Spanish teacher, um, only on this story. So I would write like a very small amount. I might write 2 paragraphs, and we would only get through one in an hour's time. So it was a long process, and she would walk me through every single line and be like, okay, this is perhaps written correctly. But given the voice that you've written in before, I would suggest changing this word to this word. And oh my goodness, I learned so many new words during this process.
I
It's
know writing,
crazy.
writing is a whole other thing for sure. Like,
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is I wanted it to be more literary and a bit more beautiful. And so my everyday conversational Spanish was not necessarily the ideal choice for the story.
finally, a reverse kind of thing happens to us where we will learn academic English, we will have writing every couple of weeks, we will have perfect course in writing and stuff, and then we'll go and meet a native speaker and we're going to have a full day. It's the end. Okay, I have my Cambridge English down to a T. Um, I don't know how to speak like a normal person because people don't talk like that. And I guess that the opposite thing is true. Like if you have learned through this chatting with other people instead of like more useful, informal day-to-day Spanish, writing a literary piece has to be hard. Like okay, I don't know where to start.
It was a definite experience. And so I am so proud of myself, and I think it was something I really wanted to do. But I wasn't ready to like jump into another one. People always ask me, "Oh, are you gonna write another story?" I'm like, not right now. I still need to recover. But I know that you write almost entirely in English. You've mentioned that it's actually more natural for you to write in English. Can
Yes, I think.
you share?
Mm, I'm not sure why exactly. Like I do know that just like you mentioned, the second started doing it, I started learning so much vocabulary. And it's really helped me step up my game with English. But I'm not sure about why it's easier for me. I guess just when I write in Spanish, since it's my tongue, it feels like I'm a lot more exposed because I'm using something that's like that's always with me. That's always been a part of my identity of how I think, of how I see the world. Whereas in English, it feels like I'm a bit more detached. Like I find it easier to go back and change things up, to replot, to rewrite, and to I find it easier to play around with words as well. Whereas in Spanish, I always have trouble with with things that I'm finding either too informal or too pompous for some
Mm.
reason. So I
Oh,
just think it's
that's
easier.
interesting.
English allows me to play around with more.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me because I do think, like, I don't know about you, I feel like a different person when I'm using one language or the other. And I I am definitely somebody who writes, contemporary or literary fiction. I don't really tend to go towards fantastical elements or elements of magic. But I did feel more open to that in the Spanish language story. In Edu, there is kind of this magical realism happening, which felt fun and natural to me in Spanish, but I've never done that in English.
It was slightly like very slightly because he did crazy things to be honest, but Gabriel Garcia Marquez with 100 Years of Solitude did similar stuff. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna give this to you. It's completely far fetched, but you know, it doesn't sound like it is. And it had a similar vibe to the one in Edgy before. I was like, oh, that's nice.
I love that. Thank you so much. I read that book, and I do think without even realizing it, I was kind of pulling from that sort of story and that sort of storytelling where there's this involvement of the grandfathers and the great great grandfathers, and it's all part of the story and why things are so impossible today.
Yeah, and it's really nice because you have Clara, who was very magical realism-ish. Again, she was talking about supernatural stuff. She was talking about like events that involve magic in a way, and she was talking about them as if they were totally normal, which is what magical realism is, like this Latin American movement, right from the 20th century. And then you had Edu, who was a lot more skeptical about it. He was like, okay, but that doesn't really sound possible to me, who feels more like Spanish literature from that same century, because after the Civil War and stuff, we were really focused on realism, on reflecting how things were. So it was a really interesting contrast in its sense, because you had the magical realism girl and the realism, this realism boy coming together. It was a really interesting contrast.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I love that. It's so exciting to get to talk to somebody who was able to read this story because I know that many of my readers don't read in Spanish or have some Spanish but not enough to potentially read this story. So it's very exciting for me when someone does.
Mhm.
Excuse me, I see a question coming in. I have an allergy situation happening, so I apologize. Edu is maybe my favorite story of the collection. Did you consider providing a version in English as well for people who don't understand Spanish? Yeah, I get this question a lot. And up until now, I have not done it. I mean, I've considered it, but because of how much time for me went into writing it in Spanish, I guess I haven't wanted to like allow it to be translated. It's kind of this weird thing that it feels so sacred to me that it's something that I wrote in Spanish. And so maybe I could do it myself. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it just wouldn't feel the same. Like I was saying, I feel like a different writer in Spanish. And so some of the things that you say, just the way that Spanish language is, I feel like I don't know if it would work well as a story in English, but maybe, maybe one day if I had the right translator.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand because when I think about translating my stuff into Spanish, it just feels like it won't work because
Mm,
the two languages from different like have different origins, so they don't work the same way. It's not as easy as like copying and pasting the words just in a different language. They work in a very different way. Some things cannot be translated very well. Culturally as well, some elements might be lost in translation. So it's hard in just, like providing a replica of the text just in a different language for sure. Like it would lose part of its essence.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I've been holding it very close to my heart so far. I won't promise that I'll never change my mind, but that is my answer to the question for now. Thank you. Thank you for that question. If anyone has any other questions, please do feel free to ask me or G. Um, but before we finish up, I did want to speak to you about translation because I know that you now are offering this service. And so I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how that's going and what kind of translation work you do.
It's going really well. So I've actually always, not always, but ever since I was like 12 or 13, I started like signing up for like forums where people translated books into Spanish. Because a lot of YA, fantasy, sci-fi books that were really popular in the Anglo-Saxon bookish world were not getting to us, to Latin America especially, but they weren't getting to Spain either. Like we weren't really getting those books the way we are now. And so a lot of small forums emerged, like popped up, where people would just buy a copy of that book and like assign chapters to different translators who signed up for it and translate the book so that people who did not speak English or didn't speak very good English could read those books. For example, the Lorien Legacies, which were awesome. They like were a whole thing. That was how we got them here first. Or the Grisha books, or lots of books actually. Um, and after like 10 years perhaps of doing that for free, I started wondering about like what if I could start doing it like as a freelance translator, and as a paid service, because it is true that it takes a lot of time, and it is true that it requires a lot of concentration, a lot of skill and stuff. And because I had been like um in contact with indie authors for a few years already, I knew that some people were interested in that. Like some people wanted their story to get to more readers. And I have been wondering, well, should I do this? Should I take the leap or not for a while? And then because of, like um personal circumstances, I find myself needing to save money quick, like to make and save money quick. And that was kind of the last push I needed to take the leap. And so what I'm doing right now is I translate all sorts of stories. For example, I'm working with epic fantasy at the moment, but I also have a contemporary women's author in the back burner, waiting for me to get started, which I will do in a few days. I work with lots of genres, lots of different formats, short stories, full novels, etc. And what I do is I basically translate them into Spanish, not just like it's a bit like we were saying. I don't just provide a replica of the text. I try to adjust it so it will sound natural, and so it will be like so that things will make sense, not just in the grammatical and syntactical sense, but also in terms of how stories tend to work in Spanish, how we tend to foreshadow things, how we tend to describe things, etc.
Mm. And I think that's very, very important. And I would definitely consider you as a translator for my work in the future because I think it is important that, I mean, anyone here listening to this interview can tell you have a incredible grasp of English. It's not just that you would be translating word from word. You truly understand the nuance of both of the languages and how stories are written in both of the languages. And so I think that is incredibly important when trying to maintain the
That
essence of a story.
oh my god, there's this one. I'm having so much fun with that one because you have two characters. One of them is like an 18-year-old, James, and then you have Brock, who's 26. And each, like, the book is told in, like, first person point of view. James narrates half the chapters, and then Roberto writes the other half. And the fun thing is, and the author and I have so many laughs about this because she understands both Spanish. The thing is that from the second I started reading the book, I was like, okay, we need to be able to tell these two apart because one of them is a Gen Z boy, the other one is millennial Jude, who has his whole life in like Historia and stuff. They can't sound the same. And in English, they do in the original version, they kind of do, but in Spanish, what I'm doing is, okay, the way we speak is so different from the way my mom speaks, from the way like my older cousins speak. We're gonna do that here, so it's fun because I have to translate chapters into Gen Z style Spanish or millennial Spanish, and it's so fun. Like some of the
Wow.
expressions Rob uses make me cringe, make me actually cringe when I'm typing them out.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I love that you're having fun doing it because it sounds like a lot of work, but
Sometimes go
amazing.
to mom and say, okay, how would you say this in your slang? Like, how would you say this thing? So fun.
That's fantastic. Oh, well, I guess those are all my questions for you. And if there are no other ones coming in today, I did just want to, of course, spotlight. So if somebody wants to take a look at your translating services and get in contact with you, where can they find you?
I'm on Instagram mostly, like in this very same account. I'm thinking about designing a web page. I'm thinking about setting up a Facebook page, but I need to sit down and actually do it. So it's just Instagram for now.
Perfect. Oh, excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, G. It really was wonderful to have your insights.
Sure.
I'll remind everyone if you're interested in checking out Edu, you can find this ebook on Amazon currently. It's also linked on my website, which is just dannyjnorwell.com. And check it out. I think it was so much fun for me to write, and I would love for more people to.
Reviews.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Remember to leave reviews for it.
Yes, you're so right. And I forget to remind people, but it really does make a huge difference, especially for indie authors. So if you read, please do review or at least leave some stars. We really appreciate it.
Even something as simple as I love this comment. Just do it. Just type it out.
Exactly. Yeah, I would very much appreciate that. So thank you for the comment, G.
Sure.
Oh, well, again, it has been a pleasure to have you, and I will leave it there. Have a great rest of your weekend, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, G.